Africa. Before the Bible. Before the written text of the Bible came into widespread use, Africa was already steeped in a rich spiritual tradition. African spirituality was rooted in the belief in a supreme God, ancestral reverence, moral living, and community values. Many African tribes believed in the Creator who was above all, supported by deities and spirits that served as intermediaries. These indigenous beliefs emphasized harmony with nature, respect for elders, and the power of oral tradition. Even before the introduction of Christianity, African spirituality had deep moral foundations and divine reverence. This foundation of belief prepared the African continent for receiving and interpreting the messages of the Bible. When Christianity arrived, it didn't erase African spirituality but interacted with it. Many African communities saw connections between their belief in a supreme being and the God of the Bible. This convergence helped the gospel spread faster across the continent. Moreover, early African converts to Christianity could relate to the parables, miracles, and calls to justice and compassion found in the teachings of Jesus. The harmony between biblical messages and traditional African spirituality made Africa fertile ground for Christian faith. Africa in the Bible. Contrary to the assumption that Africa has no biblical relevance, Africa is prominently mentioned throughout Scripture. The continent is referenced through Egypt, Ethiopia, modern-day Sudan, Kush, and Put. Egypt, a nation on the African continent, played a central role in many biblical stories, from Abraham's journey to Joseph's rise to power to Moses leading the Israelites out of bondage. African lands were not peripheral locations but critical stages in God's divine plan. One cannot overlook the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8. This man was a high-ranking official under Queen Candace of Ethiopia, and his encounter with Philip resulted in one of the first recorded African conversions to Christianity. His story symbolizes the beginning of African inclusion in the Christian faith. Other biblical figures with African ties include Simon of Cyrene, who helped Jesus carry the cross. These accounts highlight Africa's spiritual connection and integral role in biblical history. Africans as key characters in the Bible includes several prominent African figures whose lives significantly impacted biblical narratives. Moses, for instance, spent a large part of his life in Egypt, an African nation, and was shaped by African culture. His leadership, courage, and spiritual development happened within an African context. Similarly, Zipporah, the wife of Moses, was a Cushite woman, highlighting African lineage in the biblical bloodline. Another notable figure is the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon to test his wisdom. She came bearing gifts, questions, and spiritual curiosity. Her story is a testament to Africa's long-standing engagement with divine wisdom. Her journey and Solomon's response underscore a profound spiritual dialogue between Israel and Africa. These narratives challenge the notion that African spirituality was external to biblical faith. Instead, they show that Africans were not just bystanders but participants in the divine story. Early Christianity in Africa. Africa was among the first continents to embrace Christianity. The faith reached Egypt and Ethiopia within the 4th century after Jesus' resurrection. The Coptic Church in Egypt and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church are among the oldest Christian denominations in the world. These churches preserved the teachings of Jesus and developed distinct African Christian traditions that honored both scripture and local culture. The North African region produced early church fathers such as Tertullian, Origen, and Augustine of Hippo. Augustine, a Berber from present-day Algeria, became one of Christianity's most influential theologians. Their contributions to Christian theology and spiritual formation were immense. This early African presence in the church underscores that African Christians were not merely recipients of the gospel, but theologians, missionaries, and leaders who shaped Christian doctrine for centuries. Persecution, suffering, and African faith. Africa has faced waves of persecution, colonization, and suffering, yet African faith remains strong. This mirrors the biblical narrative where God's people, though oppressed, held firmly to their faith. The endurance of African Christians echoes the perseverance of early Christians who endured trials but overcame through faith. The story of the Israelites in Egypt and African land can be read as a parallel to African historical suffering and hope. Despite hardship, African Christians have continued to grow spiritually, build churches, and spread the gospel. Their resilience is not accidental. It is rooted in a spiritual depth that has sustained generations through slavery, war, and displacement. African identity and the future of biblical faith. Today, Africa is home to some of the world's fastest growing Christian populations. African pastors, theologians, and missionaries are now sending the gospel to places where it first came from. This marks a spiritual renewal and reclaiming of Africa's place in the biblical story. African identity in Christianity is no longer passive, it is powerful, prophetic, and globally relevant. The future of biblical faith will be increasingly shaped by African voices. This is not a new development, but a continuation of a legacy that started with people like Simon of Cyrene, the Ethiopian eunuch, and the Queen of Sheba. African spirituality, when merged with biblical truth, becomes a force of healing, wisdom, and divine power for the world. Do you agree with this? That Africans knows God before the scripture? Share your thoughts with me in comment section. Don't forget to like and hit the notification button. This is Wise Tales. Thanks for watching.